Russian Empire was one of the largest and most powerful nations on earth. Stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Pacific Ocean, it was ruled by the Romanov dynasty, a family that had held the throne for more than 3 centuries. Yet, in the summer of 1918, that royal lineage would come to a brutal and tragic end in a small, dimly lit basement in the Ural Mountains. What happened there still echoes as one of history's most haunting mysteries. The death of Tsar Nicholas II and his family. Nicholas Alexandrovich Romanov was not a tyrant in the traditional sense. By most accounts, he was a gentle and deeply religious man, a loving husband to Empress Alexandra, and a devoted father to their 5 children, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and the young heir, Alexei. But Nicholas was also a man born into a world that was quickly disappearing. The old order of monarchies and empires was crumbling, and Russia, with its massive social inequality, was on the verge of collapse. The early years of Nicholas's reign were marked by turmoil. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904-1905 ended in humiliating defeat, sparking revolution at home. Thousands of workers took to the streets demanding reforms, and the massacres known as Bloody Sunday forever shattered the people's faith in their Tsar. Nicholas responded with half measures, creating the Duma, a parliamentary body, while still clinging to absolute power. The cracks in the empire deepened, and resentment toward the monarchy only grew stronger. Then came World War I. The conflict drained Russia of resources and lives. Millions of soldiers perished in the trenches, while starvation and poverty swept through the cities. Nicholas made the fateful decision to take personal command of the army, leaving his wife Alexandra in charge of domestic affairs. In her loneliness and desperation, Alexandra placed her trust in a strange, charismatic mystic named Grigory Rasputin. Rasputin's presence at court became a scandal throughout Russia. A peasant from Siberia, he seemed to possess a mysterious ability to ease the pain of Alexei, the Tsarevich, who suffered from haemophilia. The Empress believed Rasputin was sent by God, but to the Russian nobility and common people alike, he was seen as a symbol of corruption and decay. Rumours spread that Rasputin was manipulating the royal family, influencing state decisions, and seducing women of the court. His assassination in 1916, orchestrated by nobles desperate to save the monarchy, came too late. The damage was done. By 1917, the empire was collapsing. Soldiers deserted the front lines, and cities were on the brink of revolt. In February, protests erupted in Petrograd. Bread lines turned into demonstrations, and the Tsar's troops refused to fire on the crowds. On March 15th, 1917, Nicholas II abdicated the throne, ending more than 300 years of Romanov rule. He hoped his abdication would bring peace to Russia, but instead it unleashed chaos. The provisional government that replaced the Tsar was weak and deeply divided. As it struggled to maintain control, another force, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, was rising. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks seized power in Petrograd, declaring a new socialist order. The Romanovs, once the most powerful family in the world, became prisoners of the revolution. At first, Nicholas, Alexandra, and their children were held under relatively comfortable conditions in the Alexander Palace. But a civil war broke out between the Red Bolsheviks and the White Army loyalists. The new regime decided the Romanovs were too dangerous to keep in the capital. They were moved to Tobolsk in Siberia, then later to the industrial city of Yekaterinburg, deep in the Ural Mountains, where they were imprisoned in a merchant's house, ominously called the Ipatiev House. By the spring of 1918, the Romanovs' world had shrunk to a few rooms behind barred windows. The guards treated them harshly, and the family was allowed little contact with the outside world. Food was scarce, and their few possessions were taken away. Still, Nicholas kept a diary, recording daily life with quiet resignation. On July 13, 1918, he wrote, "The weather is warm. We are not allowed outside. All of us feel very sad." Unbeknownst to the family, the Bolsheviks in Moscow had already decided their fate. With the White Army approaching Yekaterinburg, there was fear that the Romanovs might be rescued and used as a rallying symbol against the revolution. The local Soviet, led by Yakov Yurovsky, received secret orders. If the Whites drew near, the prisoners were to be eliminated. In the early hours of July 17th, 1918, the Romanovs were awakened and told they were to be moved for their own safety. Nicholas, still believing he might be reunited with loyalists, dressed himself and helped his son Alexei, who was too weak to walk unaided. The family, Nicholas, Alexandra, their 5 children, and 4 loyal servants, descended to the basement of the Ipatiev House. The room was small and dim, its walls whitewashed. Nicholas asked for chairs for his wife and the sickly Alexei. Yurovsky read a short statement declaring that the Bolsheviks had decided to execute them. Nicholas, startled, turned and said, What did you say?" Before he could say more, the executioners raised their pistols. The sound of gunfire shattered the silence of the night. The Tsar was the first to die. Alexandra followed moments later. The children, wearing clothes secretly lined with jewels, were partially shielded from the bullets, forcing the executioners to finish them with bayonets and rifle butts. The brutality of the massacre was unspeakable. When it was over, 11 bodies lay lifeless on the floor. Yurovsky and his men worked quickly to dispose of the remains. The corpses were loaded into a truck, driven into the forest, and buried in a shallow grave. In a grotesque attempt to hide their crime, the bodies were doused with acid and burned. Yet despite their efforts, rumours soon began to spread that some of the Romanovs, particularly the youngest daughter, Anastasia, might have survived. In the years that followed, the mystery of Anastasia became one of the most enduring legends of the 20th century. Dozens of women across Europe claimed to be the lost princess. The most famous of them, Anna Anderson, appeared in Berlin in 1920, asserting that she had escaped the execution and fled Russia. Her story captivated the world. Even some surviving Romanov relatives were convinced she might be genuine. But the truth remained elusive for decades. Meanwhile, the new Soviet government denied all knowledge of the killings. Officially, they claimed that the Tsar had been executed, but that his family was alive and in a safe place. It wasn't until 1926 that the Bolsheviks admitted the entire family had been murdered. Even then, the details of the crime were kept secret, shrouded in propaganda and fear. For more than 60 years, the location of the Romanovs' graves remained one of history's great mysteries. It wasn't until 1979 that 2 amateur historians, Alexander Avdonin and Geli Ryabov, discovered a mass grave near Yekaterinburg. They found the remains of 9 bodies, but kept their discovery secret until the late 1980s, fearing persecution under the Soviet regime. When the Soviet Union finally collapsed in 1991, the grave was excavated, and the remains were confirmed to be those of the Tsar, the Empress, and 3 of their daughters. Still, 2 bodies were missing, believed to be Alexei and one of his sisters, either Maria or Anastasia. It wasn't until 2007 that a second, smaller grave was found nearby, containing the remains of a boy and a young woman. DNA testing confirmed what historians had long suspected. The entire Romanov family had been killed that night in July 1918. The discovery brought closure to one of history's darkest mysteries, but it also reignited debate about why the executions had been carried out so brutally. Some argue that it was a political necessity, a way to ensure the monarchy could never return. Others see it as an act of vengeance, a symbolic destruction of the old world by the new. Whatever the motive, the deaths of the Romanovs marked the end of an era. In 1998, 80 years after their murder, the remains of Nicholas II and his family were finally laid to rest in the Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg, alongside their royal ancestors. The ceremony was attended by members of the surviving Romanov line and by then Russian President Boris Yeltsin, who declared, "This is a lesson to all of us, that we must never again allow such tragedies." The Russian Orthodox Church canonized Nicholas, Alexandra and their children as martyrs in 2000, honoring them as passion bearers who faced death with dignity and faith. To this day, pilgrims visit the site of the Ipatiev House, where a church now stands, the Church on the Blood, built to commemorate the family's sacrifice. Yet, the fascination with the Romanovs endures. Their story combines the grandeur of royalty, the chaos of revolution, and the haunting question of what truly happened in that basement. Even now, more than a century later, the shadows of Yekaterinburg whisper their names. Was it fate that sealed their doom, or the unstoppable tide of history sweeping away the old world? Perhaps both. The fall of the Romanovs was not just the end of a dynasty, it was the death of Imperial Russia itself. Their story remains a chilling reminder of how fragile power can be, and how the wheel of history spares no one, not even a Tsar.